The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystalline spires of Zelthara Prime as Kira made her way through the bustling marketplace. Her scaled skin, once a vibrant emerald that marked her as nobility among the Zelthani people, had dulled to a sickly pale green over the years of rejection and isolation. The ceremonial scars on her arms, which should have celebrated her coming of age and eventual motherhood, now served as cruel reminders of her failure. At 28 cycles old, Kira had endured 7 years of medical examinations, fertility treatments, and the increasingly cold stares of her people. The Zelthani civilization prized reproduction above all else, their entire social structure built around family units and genetic continuation. Women who could not bear children were considered cursed by the ancestors, unworthy of love or companionship. "Move aside, barren one," hissed Velka, a younger female whose belly already swelled with her second clutch of eggs. The marketplace crowd parted around Kira as if her infertility might be contagious, their whispered conversations following her like a toxic cloud. Kira pulled her hood lower and quickened her pace toward the outer districts where she now lived. Her former home in the noble quarter had been stripped from her when the High Council declared her genetically deficient. Now she survived on meager rations and whatever odd jobs she could find in the industrial sectors where desperate employers cared less about her condition. The sound of atmospheric engines roaring overhead interrupted her bitter thoughts. 3 sleek vessels descended through the purple clouds, their design unlike anything in the Zelthani fleet. These ships bore the angular, functional aesthetics of the Terran Alliance, and Kira felt her heart skip a beat. The humans had arrived for the scheduled diplomatic meeting, though few Zelthani seemed pleased about it. Her people had reluctantly agreed to this alliance after the Krex Empire began expanding into their territory. The insectoid Krex consumed worlds like a plague, leaving nothing but stripped planets in their wake. The Zelthani military, focused primarily on ceremonial displays rather than actual combat, had proven woefully inadequate against the Krex advance. As Kira reached her small dwelling in the lower city, she noticed increased security patrols. The council was taking no chances with their human guests, despite needing their military expertise. She had heard whispers about human fighting capabilities, stories that seemed too wild to believe. How could a species that valued individuals over genetic perfection possibly be effective warriors? Hours later, an unexpected knock at her door made her freeze. Visitors never came to her home anymore. Through the security viewer, she saw 2 figures in the distinctive blue uniforms of the Zelthani Honor Guard, accompanied by a third individual in strange, dark clothing she didn't recognize. "Kira Thelvash," announced Captain Zoran when she hesitantly opened the door. "By order of the High Council, you are to serve as cultural liaison for the human delegation. Your linguistic training makes you suitable for this task." Kira stared in shock. Her education in xenolinguistics had been completed before her infertility was discovered, back when she was still considered valuable to society. She had mastered 17 different galactic languages, including the complex human standard that most Zelthani found impossible to pronounce correctly. "I don't understand," she managed. "The Council cast me out. Why would they want me near their precious human allies?" "Because," said the figure in dark clothing, stepping forward with a slight smile, "you're the only one on this planet who can actually speak our language properly, and frankly, we're tired of trying to communicate through translators that make us sound like broken robots." Kira's breath caught. The human was tall and lean, with strange, pale skin and short brown hair. But what struck her most was his eyes, a warm brown color that seemed to actually see her as a person rather than a genetic failure. He spoke in perfect High Zelthani, his pronunciation crisp and respectful. "I'm Sergeant Marcus Chen, Terran Alliance Special Forces," he continued. "I've been studying your people's culture and language for months preparing for this mission. When I heard about your situation, I specifically requested you as our liaison. My situation? Kira asked, confusion evident in her voice. Marcus exchanged a look with Captain Zoran, who seemed uncomfortable. The humans have access to our cultural databases, the captain explained stiffly. They know about your condition. And we think it's absolutely barbaric, Marcus said bluntly, causing both Zelthani to recoil in shock. Where I come from, a person's worth isn't measured by their ability to reproduce. It's measured by their character, their skills, their contribution to society. From what I've read about your linguistic achievements and academic work, you're one of the most accomplished individuals on this planet. Kira felt tears threatening to fall. No one had spoken to her with such respect in years. But I cannot give life, she whispered. Among my people, that makes me worthless. Then your people are idiots, Marcus replied matter-of-factly. And lucky for you, I'm not one of your people. Captain Zoran cleared his throat impatiently. The council expects you to report to the diplomatic compound within the hour. You will be provided with appropriate quarters and a modest stipend for your services. After they left, Kira sat in stunned silence. This opportunity was beyond anything she had dared hope for, but it also terrified her. Working closely with the humans meant exposure to new ideas, new ways of thinking about worth and value. It meant hope, and hope was a dangerous thing for someone who had learned to expect nothing. She packed her few belongings, mostly books and linguistic study materials she had never been able to bring herself to sell. As she sealed the storage container, she caught sight of herself in the reflective surface. For the first time in years, there was a spark of something other than resignation in her violet eyes. The diplomatic compound occupied an entire district in the capital's center, its towering walls designed to impress visiting dignitaries. As Kira approached the main gate, she noticed the increased security presence. Zelthani guards stood alongside strange mechanical sentries that the humans had apparently deployed for additional protection. Inside the compound, she was struck by the contrast between the ornate Zelthani architecture and the practical modifications the humans had made. Computer terminals and communication equipment had been efficiently integrated without damaging the decorative elements, showing a respect for local culture that surprised her. Kira Thelvash? A human woman approached, her bearing confident and professional. I'm Lieutenant Sarah Hayes, Diplomatic Security. Sergeant Chen is waiting for you in the briefing room. Lieutenant Hayes led her through corridors filled with busy humans and nervous Zelthani officials. Kira noticed how the humans moved with purpose and efficiency, while her own people seemed to spend most of their time in elaborate greetings and status displays. The briefing room contained a large holographic display showing strategic positions throughout Zelthani space. Red markers indicated Krex incursions, while blue showed human fleet positions. The scope of the threat was worse than the public had been told. Ah, our linguistic expert has arrived, said Marcus as she entered. He gestured to a seat at the conference table, treating her as an equal rather than a subordinate. We were just discussing communication protocols with your military commanders. General Vorth, the highest-ranking Zelthani officer, looked uncomfortable having Kira in the room. I still don't understand why we need her here. Surely our standard translators are sufficient. With respect, General, Marcus replied, your translators have been telling us that our battle strategies are most harmonious with the cosmic flow when we're actually discussing orbital bombardment patterns. We need someone who understands both our technical language and your cultural context. Over the next several hours, Kira found herself translating not just words, but entire concepts between the two species. The humans spoke of warfare with a clinical precision that her people found disturbing, while the Zelthani approached military planning as if it were a religious ceremony. Your people have never faced real warfare, Marcus observed during a break. Your conflicts have been ritualized displays rather than actual attempts to destroy enemies. We are not a violent species, General Vorth replied stiffly. We solve disputes through negotiation and ceremony, which is admirable, Marcus acknowledged. But the Kreks don't negotiate. They consume. And they're going to consume your entire civilization unless you're willing to fight them properly. Kira watched this exchange with growing fascination. The humans seemed to understand concepts that her own people refused to acknowledge. They spoke of sacrifice and necessity, of making hard choices to protect what mattered most. It was a perspective her sheltered, ritual-focused society had never developed. As the day wore on, she began to see patterns in the human approach to problems. They valued practical solutions over traditional methods, individual initiative over group consensus, and measurable results over ceremonial correctness. Most importantly, they seemed to judge people by their abilities and contributions rather than their genetic fitness. You're very quiet, Marcus noted as the formal meetings concluded. What's your assessment of today's discussions? Kira hesitated, then decided to speak honestly. My people are going to get themselves killed, she said bluntly. They're approaching this war as if it were another territorial dispute with neighboring worlds. They don't understand that the Kreks want to exterminate them entirely. Marcus nodded approvingly. That's exactly what I was thinking. The question is, can we teach them to think differently before it's too late? I don't know, Kira admitted. My people are very set in their ways. Change comes slowly to us, and we may not have time for slow change. Then we'll have to find ways to speed up the process, Marcus said with determination, and we'll need people who can bridge the gap between our cultures, people like you. That evening, Kira found herself assigned to quarters in the human section of the compound, rather than with the Zelthani delegation. The rooms were smaller than she was accustomed to, but efficiently designed, with built-in storage and multi-purpose furniture that maximized the available space. A soft chime indicated an incoming message on the room's communication terminal. To her surprise, it was from Marcus, inviting her to join him for the evening meal in the human section's dining facility. The human dining area was unlike anything in Zelthani culture. Instead of the formal, hierarchical seating arrangements she was used to, people sat wherever they chose, mixing ranks and specialties freely. Conversation flowed naturally between topics ranging from military strategy to personal interests. How do you manage without formal social structures? Kira asked, as Marcus introduced her to several other team members. We have structures, explained Dr. Jennifer Park, the mission's xenobiologist. They're just based on expertise and responsibility rather than birth circumstances or genetic traits. But how do you maintain order? How do people know their place? People find their own place based on what they're good at and what they enjoy, said Lieutenant Hayes. Someone's value isn't predetermined by factors they can't control. The concept was revolutionary to Kira, who had been told since childhood that her worth was tied to her reproductive capacity. Here were people who seemed to believe that individuals could define their own value through their choices and efforts. It must be chaotic, she said, though she was beginning to see that it wasn't chaotic at all. These humans worked together with remarkable efficiency, despite their apparent lack of rigid hierarchy. Sometimes, Marcus admitted. But chaos can be good. It means we can adapt quickly when circumstances change. Rigid systems break when they encounter something they weren't designed to handle. As the evening progressed, Kira found herself relaxing for the first time in years. No one here whispered about her condition or avoided her touch. They asked about her work, her interests, her opinions on the current situation. They treated her as if her thoughts mattered, as if she had something valuable to contribute beyond her genetics. Later, walking back to her quarters, Marcus fell into step beside her. I hope today wasn't too overwhelming, he said. I know this must all seem very strange compared to your usual way of life. Strange, yes, Kira agreed. But not unpleasant. Your people are very different from mine. Different how? She considered how to express what she had observed. You see possibilities where my people see limitations. You ask, what if, while we ask, what has always been. It's refreshing. Marcus smiled. That's one of humanity's greatest strengths and greatest weaknesses. We're always pushing boundaries, always trying to improve things. Sometimes that gets us into trouble. But it also lets us find solutions that others might miss. They had reached her quarters, but neither seemed ready to end the conversation. Can I ask you something? Kira said hesitantly. Of course. Why did you specifically request me as liaison? You said you knew about my situation, but surely there are others with linguistic training who would be more acceptable to both our peoples. Marcus was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Because I've read your academic work. Your papers on comparative xenolinguistics are brilliant. You've identified patterns and connections that no one else has seen. That kind of insight is exactly what we need to make this alliance work. But I'm damaged, Kira said, the words coming out almost as a whisper. My own people have declared me genetically deficient. You're not damaged, Marcus said firmly. You're just different. And sometimes being different is exactly what the situation requires. As she entered her quarters, Kira reflected on the day's events. For the first time since her infertility was discovered, someone had seen value in her beyond her reproductive capacity. It was a dangerous feeling, this hope that perhaps her life could have meaning after all. Outside her window, the lights of the capital city twinkled like stars, and somewhere among them, her people continued their ancient rituals and traditions, unaware that their entire worldview was about to be challenged by the presence of these remarkable humans. The war with the Kreks would test everything the Zelthani believed about themselves, but perhaps it would also offer opportunities for growth and change. Perhaps even for someone like her, there might be a place in the future that was coming. 3 weeks had passed since Kira began working with the human delegation, and the transformation in her daily life was remarkable. Each morning brought new challenges as she helped bridge the vast cultural gap between her people and their human allies. The work was demanding but fulfilling in ways she had never experienced. Today's crisis emerged during the dawn briefing when Commander Thax of the Zelthani fleet announced that his officers were refusing to implement human tactical suggestions. They say the human strategies lack honor and proper ceremony, Thax explained to the mixed assembly. My pilots believe that engaging the enemy without proper ritual preparation will anger the ancestors. Marcus rubbed his temples in frustration. General, with respect, the Kreks destroyed the Valdris system 2 days ago. That's 3 billion people dead while your pilots worried about ancestral approval. We don't have time for ceremonies. You do not understand our ways, human, General Vorth replied coldly. Warriors who fight without spiritual guidance are no better than beasts. Our ancestors... Your ancestors are going to watch your entire species get exterminated if you don't start adapting. Marcus interrupted, his patience clearly wearing thin. Kira watched the tension escalate and realized this was exactly the kind of cultural miscommunication she could address. May I suggest something? She said, standing from her position at the side of the room. Both groups turned to her, some of the Zelthani looking annoyed that an outcast would dare interrupt such an important discussion. Marcus nodded encouragingly. Commander Thax, what if we could incorporate ritual elements into the human battle strategies? The humans value efficiency and results, while we value proper spiritual preparation. Perhaps there's a way to honor both approaches. Impossible, scoffed Captain Yelm, one of Thax's subordinates. Human tactics are crude and dishonorable. They speak of surprise attacks and strategic deception, as if warfare were some kind of hunt rather than a sacred dance between worthy opponents. The Kreks aren't worthy opponents, Kira said firmly. They're parasites. They don't honor your traditions or respect your ceremonies. They simply consume everything in their path. Fighting them with traditional methods is like trying to perform a ritual dance while a predator devours you. Marcus stepped forward. What exactly would these ritual adaptations involve? Kira had been thinking about this problem for days. Zelthani warriors draw strength from ancestral blessings and group ceremonies. What if we created new rituals that incorporated human tactical principles? Ceremonies that honor the ancestors while preparing our people for the kind of warfare they actually need to survive? The suggestion sparked heated debate among the Zelthani officers. Some were outraged at the idea of modifying sacred traditions, while others seemed intrigued by the possibility of maintaining spiritual practices while adopting effective strategies. Dr. Park, the human xenobiologist, leaned forward with interest. This could work. We've seen other species successfully blend traditional practices with modern military doctrine. The key is making the adaptations feel natural and respectful, rather than forced. Over the following hours, Kira found herself at the center of increasingly complex negotiations. She translated not just words, but entire philosophical concepts, helping both sides understand the underlying values that drove their approaches to warfare. Your people fight for genetic continuity and ancestral honor, she explained to Marcus during a break. Every battle is seen as part of an eternal struggle to prove their worth to future generations. The idea of fighting purely for survival feels empty to them. And the humans fight for practical protection of their communities, she told Commander Thax later. They don't see warfare as a spiritual exercise, but as a necessary evil to protect what they value. The idea of losing battles because you followed proper ceremony feels insane to them. Marcus began to understand the depth of the challenge they faced. It's not just about military tactics, he realized. We're asking your people to fundamentally change their worldview about what warfare means. Exactly, Kira confirmed. And that's not something that happens quickly or easily. The breakthrough came when Dr. Park suggested involving Zelthani spiritual advisors in developing new ceremonial protocols. If we can get their religious leaders to endorse adapted rituals, the military will be more likely to accept the changes. Kira was tasked with approaching the Spiritual Council, a group of elder females who rarely spoke with outsiders and had never acknowledged her existence since her infertility was discovered. The prospect terrified her, but Marcus offered to accompany her to the meeting. You don't have to do this, he told her as they walked toward the sacred district. I know how your people have treated you. You don't owe them anything. That's where you're wrong, Kira replied. I do owe them something. I owe them the chance to survive, even if they've rejected me. These are still my people, even if they don't want me. The sacred council chambers were located deep within the oldest part of the capital, in crystalline caverns that had been used for religious ceremonies for thousands of years. The air itself felt heavy with tradition and ancient power. High Priestess Vala, the eldest of the council, regarded Kira with barely concealed distaste. Why have you brought this outcast before us, human? We do not speak with the genetically cursed. Marcus stepped forward, his diplomatic training evident in his careful posture and tone. Honored priestess, I brought Kira because she understands both our cultures and can help us find a path that honors your traditions while protecting your people. Our traditions do not require protection from outsiders, another priestess interjected. They have served us well for millennia. They served you well when you faced other civilized species who shared similar values, Kira said, finding her voice despite her fear. The Kreks are not civilized. They don't honor your traditions or respect your ceremonies. They see your ritual combat preparations as opportunities to strike while you're distracted. High Priestess Vala's eyes narrowed. You dare lecture us on spiritual matters, when your own spirit is clearly flawed. Your barrenness proves the ancestors have rejected you. The words hit Kira like a physical blow. But Marcus stepped closer, his presence offering support. With respect, honored priestess, the ancestors might have given Kira different gifts for a reason. Perhaps her inability to bear children allows her to see possibilities that others cannot. What do you mean? Another council member asked, curiosity overcoming her initial dismissal. Marcus gestured to Kira. Her linguistic abilities, her understanding of multiple cultures, her freedom from traditional family obligations, these all allow her to serve in ways that others cannot. Perhaps the ancestors knew your people would need someone who could bridge worlds when the time came. It was a brilliant reframe, taking what the Zelthani saw as Kira's greatest flaw and presenting it as potential divine purpose. Kira felt a surge of gratitude and something else, a growing sense of her own worth that wasn't dependent on others' validation. High Priestess Vala considered this for a long moment. Speak, then. What changes do you propose to our sacred combat rituals? Kira had prepared extensively for this moment. Honored mothers, what if we created ceremonies that ask the ancestors for wisdom in protecting our people rather than glory in combat? What if we honored them by adapting our methods to ensure our survival rather than by maintaining forms that lead to our destruction? The discussion that followed was intense and occasionally heated. The priestesses questioned every proposed modification, testing whether it honored ancestral values or violated sacred principles. Kira found herself drawing on years of linguistic and cultural study to explain how adaptations could strengthen rather than weaken their spiritual traditions. The ancestors faced their own challenges and adapted their methods accordingly, she argued. They would understand the need to evolve our practices when facing unprecedented threats. Dr. Park contributed valuable insights about how other species had successfully modified their traditions during times of crisis. Her respectful approach and genuine interest in Zelthani spirituality helped convince the council that the humans weren't trying to destroy their culture, but to help preserve it. By the end of the session, they had outlined a series of modified rituals that incorporated human tactical principles while maintaining essential spiritual elements. Warriors would still prepare through ceremony, but the ceremonies would focus on adaptability and survival rather than rigid adherence to traditional forms. As they left the sacred chambers, High Priestess Vala stopped Kira at the door. Perhaps, she said quietly, there are purposes beyond motherhood that serve the ancestors. Your words today showed wisdom that comes from seeing beyond conventional paths. It wasn't a complete acceptance, but it was more acknowledgement than Kira had received from her people in years. Marcus noticed her struggle to process the priestess's words and offered quiet support as they walked back to the diplomatic compound. The implementation of the new protocols proved challenging, but ultimately successful. Zelthani pilots began incorporating human tactical flexibility into their spiritual preparations, while human advisors learned to present their strategies in terms of protecting rather than conquering. Kira found herself increasingly essential to these efforts, not just as a translator but as a cultural bridge who could help both species understand each other's core values. Her days were filled with meetings, consultations, and problem-solving sessions that utilized skills she had never known she possessed. More importantly, she was developing a sense of purpose and value that existed independently of her reproductive status. The humans had shown her that worth could be earned through contribution and character, and she was beginning to believe it herself. Marcus had become more than a colleague during these weeks. He sought her opinions on complex diplomatic issues, trusted her judgment in cultural matters, and treated her as an equal partner in their shared work. Their conversations often extended beyond professional topics into discussions of philosophy, literature, and personal experiences. "You've changed since we first met," he observed one evening as they reviewed translation protocols. "You seem stronger, somehow, more confident in your own abilities." Kira considered his words. "I think I'm learning to see myself through different eyes," she said. "For so long, I defined my worth through my people's standards. You've shown me that there are other ways to measure value. What you've accomplished these past weeks, bridging two completely different worldviews, helping both sides find common ground, potentially saving countless lives through better communication, that's not something everyone could do. It required your specific combination of skills, insights, and perspectives." The praise felt different from empty flattery. It was based on concrete achievements and observable contributions. Kira was beginning to understand that this was how the humans typically evaluated worth, through actions and results rather than genetic potential or social status. Late that night, as she worked alone in her quarters, translating a complex technical manual into High Zelthani, Kira reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. 3 weeks ago, she had been a reject living in isolation, surviving on scraps and charity. Now she was an essential part of a historic alliance that might determine the survival of her entire species. The irony wasn't lost on her that her greatest contribution to her people's future came precisely because she couldn't contribute to their genetic future. Her infertility, which had made her worthless in Zelthani society, had freed her to develop skills and perspectives that were now desperately needed. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority message. The communication displayed urgent tactical information. Krek's forces had been detected massing for an attack on the outer colonies. The real test of the new human-Zelthani cooperation was about to begin. As she prepared emergency translation materials for the crisis response meetings, Kira felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. The coming battle would determine whether the cultural bridges they had built were strong enough to support effective military cooperation. It would also test her own growing sense of purpose and belonging in this new world where worth was earned rather than inherited. The war was about to begin in earnest, and for the first time in her life, Kira had a role that truly mattered. She was no longer an outcast looking in from the margins. She was an essential part of something larger than herself, something that valued her unique contributions rather than rejecting her genetic limitations. Outside her window, the first transport ships were beginning to launch, carrying mixed human-Zelthani crews to defensive positions throughout the system. The sight filled her with both hope and determination. These partnerships she had helped forge might be the key to saving not just her people, but countless other species threatened by the Krek's advance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new communication crises, and new opportunities to prove that worth was earned through service rather than bestowed by genetics. Kira was ready to face them all. The battle alert sirens wailed across the diplomatic compound as Kira rushed toward the command center. 6 months had passed since the humans arrived, and the alliance she had helped forge was about to face its ultimate test. Krek's forces had broken through the outer defensive lines and were advancing toward Zelthara Prime itself. In the command center, chaos reigned as officers from both species struggled to coordinate their response. The new mixed crews had trained extensively, but this was their first real engagement against the devastating Krek's war machines. "Sector 7 is reporting heavy casualties," Commander Thax announced grimly. "The new ritual protocols are helping with coordination, but our pilots are still hesitating at critical moments. They're not fully adapted to human-style rapid response tactics." Marcus studied the tactical displays with growing concern. The Kreks are exploiting those hesitation periods. They're timing their attacks for exactly when our forces are most vulnerable. Kira watched the battle reports streaming in and felt a familiar sense of helplessness. Despite all their progress in cultural integration, her people were still dying because they couldn't fully abandon their traditional approaches to warfare. The weight of failure pressed down on her as she realized that her diplomatic efforts might not have been enough. "I need to get out there," she announced suddenly, surprising everyone in the room. General Vorth looked at her with disbelief. You are not military personnel. You have no place on a battlefield. She's right, Marcus said, understanding her reasoning immediately. The problem isn't tactical. It's cultural. Our pilots know what they need to do, but they need someone they trust to help them overcome their cultural programming in real time. Dr. Park pulled up personnel files on her tablet. Kira's psychological profile shows high stress tolerance and rapid decision-making abilities. She could function as a cultural advisor aboard one of the command ships. The suggestion sparked immediate protest from the Zelthani officers. Having an infertile female in a combat zone violated every tradition they held sacred. But Marcus cut through their objections with cold logic. How many more pilots are you willing to lose to tradition? Kira understands both our tactical approaches and your cultural constraints. She might be the only person who can help your people fight effectively without abandoning their core identity. An hour later, Kira found herself aboard the ZNS Valorius, the flagship of the Zelthani Home Defense Fleet. The ship's commander, Captain Rylan, regarded her presence with barely concealed hostility. I want it on record that I oppose having civilians aboard my vessel during combat operations, he stated formally. Noted and logged, Marcus replied from his position at the Human Advisory Station. Now can we focus on keeping everyone alive? The Krex attack fleet was massive, their insectoid bioships moving in perfect coordination like the hive mind they served. Each vessel pulsed with organic technology that seemed to adapt and evolve even as the battle progressed. Their ships are learning from our attack patterns, reported Lieutenant Zara from the tactical station. Every time we engage, they develop new countermeasures. Kira studied the enemy formations through the ship's sensors and noticed something the others had missed. Captain, their coordination is based on pheromone communication networks. If we could disrupt those signals... The Krex don't use pheromones in space, Captain Rylan said dismissively. There's no atmosphere to carry chemical signals. But they do use quantum-entangled biotransmitters that function similarly. Dr. Park's voice came through the communication system from the command center. Kira might be onto something. Marcus leaned forward with interest. What are you thinking? Kira's mind raced as she connected patterns from her xenobiological studies with the tactical situation unfolding before them. If we could target their command vessels with specific frequency disruptions, we might be able to break their coordination long enough for our forces to engage effectively. The plan that emerged was risky and unconventional. Instead of direct assault, mixed human Zelthani squadrons would perform coordinated strikes designed to isolate Krex command ships and disrupt their communication networks. It required precise timing and unprecedented cooperation between species with fundamentally different combat philosophies. This is madness, Captain Yelm protested from his squadron position. We're abandoning every principle of honorable combat. Honor won't matter if we're all dead, Kira replied over the communication channel. The ancestors would want us to protect our people, not to die gloriously following obsolete traditions. Her words carried weight because they came from someone who had suffered personally from rigid adherence to tradition. The pilots knew her story. The woman cast aside for infertility who had become essential to their survival. As the battle commenced, Kira found herself serving as a real-time cultural translator, helping Zelthani pilots adapt human tactics while maintaining their spiritual connections. When Squadron Leader Vex hesitated before a crucial flanking maneuver, she reminded him that protecting his wingmates honored the ancestors more than perfect formation flying. When pilot after pilot struggled with the unconventional attack patterns, she helped them reframe the mission in terms of defending their families rather than achieving personal glory. Gradually, the Zelthani forces began to fight with a flexibility and intensity they had never shown before. The turning point came when Commander Thax's flagship was severely damaged and in danger of destruction. Traditional protocol demanded that nearby vessels maintain formation and await orders. But Kira's voice cut through the communication channels with urgent clarity. All units, the command ship carries the future of our people. The ancestors judge us not by our adherence to formation, but by our willingness to sacrifice for those we serve. The response was immediate. Zelthani ships broke formation to provide covering fire, while human vessels moved in for rescue operations. The coordinated effort saved hundreds of lives and demonstrated the true potential of their alliance. But the battle was far from over. The Kreks, adapting to the disruption tactics, began implementing new coordination methods that threatened to overwhelm the defensive forces. "They're evolving faster than we anticipated," Marcus reported grimly. "We need something they can't adapt to." Kira studied the tactical displays and noticed something in the Krek's attack patterns. "They're not just adapting. They're learning from our responses and trying to predict our next moves. What if we did something completely unpredictable? Like what? Like having me broadcast directly to their command ships," she said, her voice steady despite the audacity of her suggestion. Everyone on the bridge stared at her in shock. Captain Ryland was the first to voice what they were all thinking. "That's suicide. You're not trained for combat communications under fire." "I'm trained for something better," Kira replied. "I'm trained to communicate across species barriers. The Kreks might be a hive mind, but they still process information through linguistic structures. If I can broadcast confusion signals in their own communication patterns..." Dr. Park's excited voice came through the communication system. "She could create linguistic chaos in their coordination networks, not just disrupting their signals, but making them meaningless. It's brilliant." The plan required Kira to position herself at the ship's primary communication array, directly exposing her to enemy targeting systems. If the Kreks identified her as the source of the disruption, she would become their primary target. Marcus materialized beside her as she prepared for the dangerous assignment. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "We can find another way." "No, we can't," Kira replied. "This is why I'm here. This is what all my training and experience has prepared me for. For the first time in my life, I can do something that no one else can do." As she worked at the communication console, frantically analyzing Krek's communication patterns and preparing her linguistic assault, Kira felt a profound sense of purpose. Every language she had mastered, every cultural study she had completed, every moment of rejection and isolation had led to this moment where her unique skills could save countless lives. The broadcast began as a subtle corruption of Krek's command signals, introducing linguistic anomalies that created confusion in their coordination networks. Gradually, she increased the complexity of the disruption, weaving contradictory commands and impossible instructions into their communication matrix. The effect was immediate and devastating. Krek ships began attacking each other, their perfect coordination dissolving into chaos as conflicting orders propagated through their network. Some vessels simply stopped moving, their crews apparently paralyzed by the contradictory information flooding their systems. "It's working!" Captain Ryland announced with amazement. "Their entire formation is collapsing." But success came at a cost. The Kreks quickly identified the source of the disruption and began concentrating their fire on the Valorious. The ship shuddered under the assault as enemy beams tore through its defenses. "Hull breaches on multiple decks," Lieutenant Zara reported. "We can't maintain this position much longer." Kira continued her linguistic assault, even as the ship trembled around her. Every moment of disruption gave their forces more time to exploit the chaos in the enemy ranks. She poured years of frustration and rejection into corrupting the Krek's communications, turning their perfect unity into a weapon against themselves. The final blow came when she discovered the linguistic key to their command hierarchy, a specific pattern that identified priority orders from their hive queens. By corrupting this signal, she could make their entire fleet believe they were receiving contradictory orders from multiple queens simultaneously. The result was spectacular. The entire Krex attack force began breaking apart as different sections attempted to follow what they believed were authentic commands from their supreme leaders. Within minutes, the organized invasion had become a scattered retreat as confused Krex vessels fled in all directions. As the immediate threat passed, Kira collapsed at her station, exhausted from the intense mental effort required to maintain the linguistic assault. Marcus was beside her instantly, checking for injuries and offering support. "You did it," he said with wonder. "You saved everyone." Captain Rylan approached hesitantly, his expression transformed from hostility to respect. "I owe you an apology," he said formally. "I was wrong about your worth to our people." The weeks following the victory brought changes that Kira could never have imagined. Her role in the battle became legendary among both species, and she found herself receiving honors and recognition from the very people who had once rejected her. High Priestess Vala personally delivered a formal apology on behalf of the Spiritual Council. "We failed to see that the ancestors worked through many paths," she said. "Your gifts were different from those we traditionally valued, but they proved essential when our people faced their greatest trial." The Zelthani government offered her restoration to full citizenship, including a noble title and formal recognition of her contributions. But perhaps more meaningful was the personal transformation she had undergone. "I don't need their approval anymore," she told Marcus as they walked through the rebuilt diplomatic compound. "I know my own worth now, and it doesn't depend on what others think of my genetics." Marcus smiled at her confidence. "That's the most human thing you've ever said." Their relationship had deepened during the crisis, evolving from professional cooperation to something much more personal. Marcus had requested permanent assignment to Zelthara Prime, officially to oversee continued military cooperation, but everyone understood his real motivation. "The Council has asked me to head a new Xenolinguistics Institute," Kira mentioned as they paused by a memorial to those lost in the battle. "They want to study communication with other species and develop better protocols for future alliances." "That sounds perfect for you. What did you tell them?" "I said I'd consider it, but only if they agree to evaluate candidates based on ability rather than genetic fitness. No more excluding people for things they can't control." The change in policy was revolutionary for Zelthani society, but Kira's heroic role in their survival made her recommendations difficult to ignore. Already, other individuals previously rejected for various genetic flaws were being reconsidered for positions based on their actual qualifications. Dr. Park had submitted a research proposal for joint human-Zelthani studies of genetic diversity and social adaptation. Her preliminary findings suggested that societies that valued genetic variation and individual differences were more resilient and adaptable than those that enforced genetic conformity. "It's ironic," Kira observed. "My inability to reproduce may have made me more valuable to my species' survival than if I had been able to bear children normally." "Or maybe," Marcus suggested, "worth was never about genetics in the first place. Maybe it was always about what individuals choose to do with whatever gifts they have." As they continued their walk, Kira reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From outcast to hero, from worthless to invaluable. The transformation had been as much about changing her own perspective as about changing others' opinions. The humans had shown her that value could be earned through contribution rather than inherited through genetics. They had demonstrated that societies grew stronger by including diverse perspectives rather than by enforcing conformity. Most importantly, they had proved that individual worth was determined by character and choice, rather than by biological function. "What happens now?" she asked Marcus as they reached her quarters. "Now we build something better," he replied. A society that values people for who they are rather than what they can produce. A civilization that grows stronger through diversity rather than weaker through exclusion. Kira looked out at the city spreading below them, where human and Zelthani worked together on reconstruction projects. Children of both species played in integrated groups, learning each other's languages and customs. The future being built was different from anything either species had imagined, but it was better than what either could have achieved alone. "I never thought I'd say this," she admitted, "but I'm grateful for my infertility. Without it, I would never have been available for this work. I would never have developed the skills that made me useful. I would never have been forced to find worth beyond reproduction." Marcus took her hand gently. "You would have found your worth eventually. People with your intelligence and compassion always do. It might have taken longer, but you would have made valuable contributions whatever your circumstances." As the twin suns set over Zelthara Prime, painting the sky in brilliant purples and golds, Kira felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had found her place in the universe, not despite her perceived flaws, but because of how those challenges had shaped her unique perspective and abilities. The alliance between humans and Zelthani continued to strengthen, built on the foundation of mutual respect and shared values that she had helped establish. Other species were beginning to take notice, interested in joining a coalition that valued contribution over genetics, diversity over conformity. Her people had cast her aside for being infertile, but a human soldier had seen her worth and chosen her, not in spite of her differences, but because of them. In doing so, he had not just saved her, he had helped save both their civilizations. The stars above held countless worlds and civilizations, many of which might face similar challenges in the future. But thanks to the bonds forged between species that valued individuals for their contributions rather than their genetic perfection, there was hope that wisdom and cooperation might triumph over prejudice and destruction. Kira had learned that worth was not something to be given or taken away by others. It was something to be discovered within oneself and demonstrated through service to something larger than personal desire. In helping others find this truth, she had finally found her own place in the cosmos.